The flashing red and blue lights lit up my front yard like a crime scene. I couldn't believe it. 3 patrol cars were parked outside my own house, and officers were marching up my driveway. Their reason? The HOA president, Karen, had called them because I'd violated community rules by parking my unmarked SUV in my own driveway. I leaned against the truck, arms crossed, trying not to laugh as the young deputy approached me, badge gleaming under the porch light. He didn't even know who I was, his boss. When I finally pulled out my credentials, the look on his face was priceless. But what Karen didn't know was that her call had just triggered a full investigation, one that would uncover her illegal HOA schemes, fake fines, and misuse of community funds. She thought she could call the cops on me. She didn't know I am the cops. The morning sunlight poured through the blinds, cutting gentle lines of gold across my kitchen counter. I had just finished brewing my coffee when I noticed something taped to the front door. It was bright yellow, fluttering slightly in the breeze from the air vent. My first thought was that it was a delivery notice, maybe something from the post office. But as I pulled it off and read the bold, red letters across the top, I couldn't help but chuckle. Notice of HOA violation, unauthorized vehicle parking. Stared at the paper, half amused, half confused. The unauthorized vehicle they were referring to was my black Chevy Tahoe, an unmarked sheriff's vehicle, parked neatly in my own driveway. The irony was too good. I'd been the county sheriff for nearly 7 years, enforcing real laws that actually mattered, and now here I was, being threatened over community rule for driveway parking restrictions. I had only moved into the neighborhood 2 weeks ago. The place was quiet, family-oriented, and tucked neatly on the edge of town, perfect for someone like me who needed a little peace after long shifts. I'd chosen not to tell anyone about my job. When people find out you're the sheriff, they either act overly polite or go out of their way to test your patience. So I decided to keep it simple. I was just Dan Miller, the new guy on Cedarwood Lane. I poured another cup of coffee and laughed to myself. Guess I'm already famous, I muttered. Still, I didn't want to start any unnecessary trouble. Maybe it was a mix-up. Maybe the HOA hadn't realized my vehicle was a law enforcement one. I folded the paper, slipped it into a drawer, and went about my morning routine. Eggs toast, a quick jog, and then off to the station. When I returned home around noon, I found 2 more notices taped to my garage door. This time, the tone wasn't just strict, it was downright hostile. Failure to comply may result in fines. One read. The other was a typed letter, signed by the HOA president herself, Karen Ellie Peterson. Her words were sharp and condescending, as if she were addressing a child who'd misbehaved. Mr. Miller, our neighborhood maintains a strict parking policy to preserve community order. Repeated violations will not be tolerated. Please move your vehicle to the designated guest lot immediately to avoid penalty. I exhaled slowly, staring at the letter. It wasn't about parking, it was about control. I'd dealt with people like Karen before. Every community had one, the self-appointed ruler who believed power came from paper, notices, and threats. I wasn't angry yet, but I was irritated enough to pay her a visit. Her office was located in a small, neatly kept building near the entrance of the subdivision. A sign above the door read Cedarwood Homeowners Association, maintaining order and excellence. I knocked lightly, and a voice snapped, "Come in." Karen looked exactly how I imagined her, neatly pressed pastel blouse, pearl earrings, and a frown that seemed permanently glued to her face. She was on the phone, talking loudly about code enforcement and non-compliant residents. When she hung up, she didn't even look at me. She asked sharply, flipping through a stack of papers. "Don Miller," I replied calmly. "I just moved into the neighborhood. I got a few notices about my vehicle." She sighed, as if my presence was an inconvenience. "Yes, the black SUV in the driveway. You can't park there overnight. It's against HOA regulations." "It's my driveway," I said politely, keeping my tone even. "And it's a government vehicle, unmarked, but official." Karen raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "Rules apply to everyone, Mr. Miller. I don't care what kind of vehicle it is. If it's in the driveway overnight, it's a violation." For a moment, I just looked at her. I could tell she was used to people backing down, nodding quickly, and apologizing. But I wasn't one of them. "I understand your concern," I said finally, "but my vehicle is part of my job. I'll make sure it's parked properly in my driveway." Her eyes narrowed. "You people always think you're special," she muttered under her breath. I caught it, but let it slide. "Have a good day, Miss Peterson," I said, turning to leave. The moment I stepped outside, I felt a strange mix of irritation and amusement. I'd dealt with criminals, corrupt officials, and stubborn juries. But this woman, this self-declared neighborhood queen, was going to be a different kind of challenge. That evening, I parked the Tahoe exactly where it had been before, right in the middle of my driveway. I wasn't trying to provoke her. I was simply refusing to be bullied over nonsense. As the sun went down, I noticed the flicker of lights from the corner of the street. Karen's house? She was standing by her window, peeking through the blinds, phone in hand. I could almost feel the storm brewing. I shook my head, grabbed a beer from the fridge, and sat on the porch. The night air was cool, crickets chirping softly in the distance. It was peaceful, but underneath that peace, I knew something was coming. Karen didn't strike me as the type to let things go, and I was right. The next morning, I woke to find yet another letter. This one slid under my door instead of taped. The message was simple and bold. Final warning, move your vehicle or face legal consequences. I laughed out loud, shaking my head. Legal consequences. She had no idea who she was threatening. I folded the letter carefully, put it in my jacket pocket, and thought to myself, if she wanted a fight, she was about to get one. But not the kind she was expecting, because the next time the law came knocking on my door, it wouldn't be for me. It would be because of me. By the time the second week rolled around, I had already stopped paying attention to Karen's letters. Every day, she found a new way to remind me that I was breaking some sort of rule. One morning it was grass height above HOA standard. The next, unsanctioned mailbox paint color. It was almost comical. My neighbors had warned me quietly, in whispers and nervous glances. She's been running this neighborhood for 10 years, one of them said. She doesn't take kindly to anyone challenging her authority. I'd smiled and replied, I've dealt with worse than HOA authority. That particular evening, I came home well after dark. It had been a long shift, a hit-and-run case on the outskirts of town. Hours of paperwork, and 2 arrests that left me dead tired. All I wanted was a warm meal and 8 hours of uninterrupted sleep. I parked the black Tahoe in the same spot it always sat, neatly in the middle of my driveway, not blocking anyone, not touching the sidewalk. I killed the engine and leaned back in the seat, exhaling slowly. My home was supposed to be my quiet place, my escape from sirens, reports, and criminals. But as I got out of the SUV, I noticed a small, flickering light near the end of the street, the glow from Karen's golf cart. The electric hum grew louder as she drove straight toward me. Stopping just short of the curb, the look on her face said it all. The Queen was angry. She stepped out with her clipboard, heels clicking dramatically against the pavement. Mr. Miller, she snapped, we've been over this. You're still parking in violation of Code 4B. I turned toward her, calm and patient. Ma'am, this vehicle is part of my work. It's not a personal car. It's an unmarked government vehicle. She crossed her arms. I don't care if it's from the White House, it doesn't belong in that driveway overnight. It sets a bad example for the neighborhood. I rubbed the back of my neck, suppressing a smile. A bad example? For parking my own car on my own property. Her lips tightened. You can be sarcastic all you want, but I'll have law enforcement deal with it if you don't take me seriously. That made me laugh quietly. Law enforcement, I said. You're going to call the police over a parked car. Her eyes narrowed. Yes, I have every right to enforce community rules. I gave her a small nod. Do what you have to do, Karen. But I'll warn you, you might regret wasting their time. She huffed, turned sharply, and stomped back to her golf cart. The little electric motor whirred away into the night as she muttered something about reckless residence and discipline. I didn't think she'd actually go through with it. Surely even Karen had enough sense to know how ridiculous it was to call the police on a parked vehicle. I was wrong. It was close to midnight when I heard it. The unmistakable sound of approaching sirens. At first, I thought it was my imagination, the kind of phantom sound law enforcement officers hear, even when they're off duty. But as the sirens grew louder, echoing through the cul-de-sac, my heart sank, not in fear, but in disbelief. Blue and red lights flashed across my living room walls. I peeked out the front window and saw not one, but 3 patrol cars pulling up in front of my house. The first officer stepped out, hand resting on his holster, scanning the area as if he were responding to an armed suspect. Behind him, standing proudly in her robe and slippers, was Karen, arms folded, chin raised high. I opened the door and stepped out onto the porch. Evening, officers, I called out. What seems to be the problem? The lead officer, a young deputy I recognized immediately from my department, Davis, looked slightly uncomfortable. We got a complaint from the HOA about an unauthorized vehicle parked in the driveway, he said hesitantly, reading off his notepad. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. An unauthorized vehicle, I repeated. Did the report mention it's an official sheriff's vehicle? He blinked. Sir? Karen jumped in before he could answer. Don't listen to him. He's lying. That's no government car. It's been sitting there for days. It's against the rules. I sighed and reached into my pocket. Deputy Davis, I said, holding out my badge. Take a good look. His eyes widened as he read it. His posture straightened instantly. Sheriff Miller? He stammered. Sir, I didn't realize. Karen's expression faltered. Wait, what? She said, her voice cracking. I stepped down from the porch, my tone calm but firm. You called the police on the county sheriff for parking in his own driveway. Karen, you might want to think twice before dialing 911 next time. Davis glanced between us, awkward and unsure. Ma'am, he finally said, this vehicle is official law enforcement property. It's not subject to HOA codes. Karen looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. Teeth, this can't be right. There must be some mistake. There's no mistake. I cut in. Now, unless you want to explain to dispatch why you made a false report, I suggest you go home. Her mouth opened, then closed again. She turned red, muttered something about respect, and stormed off into the dark, her slippers slapping against the pavement. The deputies lingered for a moment, clearly trying not to laugh. Davis finally shook his head and said, "You just moved here, sir." "Yeah," I said, smiling faintly. "Figured it'd be a quiet neighborhood." He chuckled. "Guess you figured wrong." As the patrol cars pulled away, I stood there for a long while, the cool night air brushing against my face. Karen had crossed a line tonight. She didn't just call the cops, she called my cops. And if she thought this little power game was over, she was sorely mistaken. Because now, I wasn't just a neighbor. I was an investigator, and something told me this neighborhood had a lot more going on than a few parking disputes. Asterisk the next morning. The neighborhood was unusually quiet. Not a single lawnmower buzzed, no dogs barked, and the usual sound of sprinklers clicking away was gone. It felt like everyone was watching me from behind their curtains. I wasn't surprised. Word travels fast in small communities, and Karen's midnight stunt had probably turned into a front yard gossip special by sunrise. I brewed a cup of coffee and stepped outside. The cool air carried the smell of freshly cut grass from somewhere down the block. My Tahoe still sat in the same place, perfectly parked, looking innocent enough. Yet it seemed to have become the neighborhood's biggest crime. I leaned against the hood, sipping my coffee, when my next-door neighbor, Mr. Phillips, peeked over his hedge. "She really called the cops on you, huh?" he said, shaking his head. "Sure did," I replied with a chuckle. "Didn't expect a full patrol response for a parked car." He laughed softly, then lowered his voice. "She's done this before. You know, last year, she called 911 on a teenager for washing his car on a non-designated day. She said it was water misuse. The poor kid's mom almost sold their house after that." I sighed. "Sounds like a pattern." "Karen doesn't like being questioned," he warned. "But you might be the first person she can't control." That part, at least, was true. Around noon, as I was catching up on paperwork from home, I noticed another car slow down in front of my house. Not a neighbor this time, but the same deputy from last night, Davis. He stepped out, his posture straight and respectful. I walked out to meet him halfway down the driveway. "Morning, Sheriff," he greeted quickly, clearly still embarrassed from the night before. "Mind if I have a word?" "Go ahead," I said, nodding toward the porch. He hesitated before speaking. "I wanted to apologize again for last night. We had no idea it was you until, well, I waved it off. No harm done, son. You did your job. You responded to a call. That's what you're supposed to do." He nodded gratefully, but then added, "If it helps, dispatch logged Karen's report as a domestic disturbance to justify sending units. That's why 3 cars showed up. She told them you were being aggressive toward her and threatening to resist HOA enforcement." I frowned. "She lied to dispatch." "Afraid so," he said. "But since nothing happened, it was marked resolved. I can still pull the report if you want to file a complaint." I thought for a moment. "No, not yet. Let's keep it quiet for now." Davis nodded again and climbed back into his cruiser. As he pulled away, I stood there, letting that information sink in. It wasn't about parking anymore. Karen had fabricated a story serious enough to bring multiple officers to my door. That meant she wasn't just overzealous, she was dangerous. That evening, I decided to take a walk around the neighborhood. I needed to understand the environment better, maybe talk to a few residents without my badge in the way. Kids were riding bikes, families were grilling dinner in their driveways, and for a moment, everything looked like a peaceful suburban postcard. But I noticed something. As I passed certain homes, people would nod politely, glance toward Karen's house, then lower their voices. It was the kind of silent fear I'd seen before, the kind that came from living under someone's thumb. Karen's house sat on the corner lot, a massive brick structure with a perfect lawn, and of course, a sign out front that read, HOA President, keeping Cedarwood safe and beautiful. I couldn't help but grin at the irony. She was outside watering her flowers when she saw me. "Oh, it's you," she said coldly. "Here to threaten me again?" I stayed calm. "No threats, Karen, just taking a walk." "We'll keep walking," she snapped. "I spoke with legal counsel today, and will be filing an official community complaint against you." "Legal counsel?" I raised an eyebrow. For harassment," she said, her voice dripping with self-importance, "and intimidation. You can't just flash a fake badge and scare people, Mr. Miller." I laughed softly. "A fake badge? That's a new one." She smirked. "We'll see what the county thinks when they hear about this." I leaned slightly forward, keeping my tone measured but firm. "Karen, the county already knows. You're talking to them." She blinked, confused for a second. Then it hit her, the full realization of what I'd just said. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. "I wasn't lying last night," I said. "I am the county sheriff. You didn't just call the cops on a neighbor, you called them on the head of law enforcement for this district." Her face drained of color. That can't be." "Oh, it can," I replied. "And now, I have a reason to start looking into a few things. Because you didn't just waste police time, Karen. You falsified a report." She stepped back, clutching her garden hose like it might protect her. "Why you wouldn't dare?" "I wouldn't have," I said quietly. "If you'd stopped at a few warning letters, but calling in a fake emergency, that's a different story." Without another word, I turned and walked away, leaving her speechless on her perfect green lawn. When I got home, I pulled out my laptop and opened the county's database. If Karen was abusing HOA power the way everyone said, there'd be a paper trail and I was going to find it. As I scrolled through the records, something immediately stood out. Dozens of formal complaints filed by residents over the past 5 years. Fines for noise, unapproved decorations, even overly bright porch lights. But none of them had ever been processed through legitimate HOA channels. The funds had been marked as community fees, paid directly to an account under Karen's name. I leaned back in my chair, a grim smile forming. She thought she could manipulate neighbors, twist rules, and bully people into silence. But now she'd picked a fight with someone who knew exactly how to dig for the truth, and I was just getting started. Asterisk for the next few days. I kept my distance from Karen. I didn't want her to know I was already digging through her paper trail. She was the kind of person who thrived on control, and the best way to take down someone like that was to let them feel safe, just long enough to get comfortable again. So, while she pranced around the neighborhood in her golf cart, clipboard in hand, issuing fines and warnings, like a queen handing out orders, I quietly built my case. At the sheriff's office, I used my credentials to access the HOA's official records. Technically, homeowners associations are required to file annual financial reports and audits with the county for transparency. Karen had been president for nearly a decade, but when I pulled the filings, something immediately stood out. There were only 3 reports on record, spaced years apart, and the numbers didn't make sense. Each document claimed community improvements worth tens of thousands of dollars. Yet there were no records of contractors, permits, or receipts. I printed everything out and took the files home. That night, I sat at my dining table, surrounded by paperwork, highlighter in hand, tracing patterns that looked more like money laundering than neighborhood management. The maintenance fund she mentioned in every fine letter didn't exist in the official books. Instead, I found a separate account listed under Cedarwood Operations, with a P.O. box instead of a bank address. That wasn't just sloppy bookkeeping, that was deliberate hiding. Around 9 p.m., there was a soft knock on my door. I opened it to find my neighbor, Mrs. Harper, a sweet older lady who lived 2 houses down. She looked nervous, glancing around before speaking. "I heard what happened the other night," she whispered. "You standing up to Karen." Well, it gave some of us a bit of hope. I invited her in, offering her a chair at the table. She eyed the stack of documents. "You're investigating her, aren't you?" I nodded, off the record. "Yes, but it's not just about me anymore. From what I'm seeing, she's been stealing from this neighborhood for years." Mrs. Harper sighed, her voice trembling. "That woman fined me $500 last spring for having a wind chime. She said it violated the noise aesthetic clause. When I refused to pay, she threatened to take me to court. I didn't have the energy to fight her, so I just wrote the check." "Who'd you make it out to?" I asked. She thought for a second. "Not the HOA. I remember that. It was something like Cedarwood Maintenance Group. That was the same name I'd seen in the financial records." My suspicions were confirmed. Karen had set up a fake entity to funnel money from residents into her own pocket. Over the next few days, I spoke quietly with several other neighbors. The stories were all the same: made-up violations, illegal threats, and forced fees that never showed up in HOA budgets. One family had even been denied use of the community pool for missing a single payment. By Thursday, I had gathered enough statements, documents, and transaction evidence to justify a deeper look. I drove to the county courthouse, met with the district attorney, and laid everything out on his desk. "Sheriff, you're saying the HOA president has been extorting residents?" he asked, flipping through the papers. "Extorting, falsifying records, and possibly embezzling," I confirmed. "And she filed a false police report against me, which is what led me to start digging in the first place." He frowned, clearly impressed by how thorough my file was. "You've got enough here for a warrant, but we'll need an official audit to move forward." "I can get that," I said. "Make it happen," he replied. "Once the audit's done, we'll have her." That night, I called in a small team, 2 deputies and a certified auditor who'd handled HOA fraud cases before. We scheduled the inspection for Saturday morning. When dawn broke that day, Cedarwood Lane was still quiet. The sun glowed over the rooftops, and a few early joggers waved as they passed my house, unaware that the biggest storm in the neighborhood's history was about to hit. At precisely 9 a.m., we arrived at the HOA office in 3 county vehicles. The sight alone drew curious stares from every window. Karen stepped outside, clearly irritated, holding her ever-present clipboard. "What's going on here?" she demanded, marching toward us. "Good morning, Miss Peterson," I said evenly. "We're here to conduct a financial review of the Cedarwood Homeowners Association." Her face twisted in disbelief. "You can't do that. This is private property." "Actually," I replied, holding up the county seal, "this is a registered community organization. By law, you're required to maintain transparent financial records. We have a warrant to review those files." She froze. For the first time, I saw real fear flicker in her eyes. You can't just barge in here." "I'm not barging in," I said calmly. "I'm enforcing the law." As my team began collecting files and computers, Karen's composure crumbled. She tried to grab a folder from one of the deputies, shouting, "That's confidential. You can't touch that." "Ma'am, step aside," one of them warned. within minutes. We had boxes of documents and several hard drives ready for transport. The entire scene was unfolding under the watchful eyes of nearly every neighbor in sight. I turned to Karen one last time. "You could have stopped this," I said quietly. "All you had to do was treat people fairly." She glared at me, trembling with rage. "You think you're the hero here, Sheriff. You have no idea who you're dealing with." I met her stare without flinching. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with. A bully who finally ran out of lies." As we loaded the last box into the car, I could hear the murmurs spreading among the neighbors. The Queen of Cedarwood had just lost her crown, but I knew the battle wasn't over yet. The audit might prove her crimes, but what came next would decide everything, and something told me Karen wasn't going down quietly. The courtroom was filled with a thick, uneasy silence as the trial began. Cameras lined the back wall, and half the town had shown up to see the showdown between the HOA heroes and meet the man they tried to humiliate in his own driveway. Karen sat at the front, wearing her usual pearl necklace and an expression of self-importance, as if she still held some kind of power over everyone in the room. But this time, the tables were completely turned. I wasn't here as the victim or the defendant. I was here as Sheriff Daniel Ross, the same man they called the police on for parking in his own driveway. The judge, an old friend of mine, kept things professional, but his tone was razored. "Let's be clear," he began. "This isn't a case about parking violations or noise complaints. This is about abuse of authority, harassment, and obstruction of law enforcement." The HOA lawyer tried to argue that they were just following community standards, but the judge cut him off immediately. "Community standards," he said, "don't give you the right to threaten or detain a law officer on his own property." Karen's face began to pale. Her husband kept whispering to her, urging her to stay calm, but she was trembling. I was given the floor to speak, and as I stood, the entire courtroom turned toward me. I took a slow breath, letting every eye feel the weight of what I was about to say. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, "when people use authority not to protect others, but to control them, they forget what community truly means." The HOA didn't just cross a line, they tried to destroy a man's dignity. But the irony is, they picked the wrong man this time. I played the body cam footage that captured the entire confrontation that night. The HOA board surrounding my truck, shouting threats, demanding my keys, and calling 911. The room went silent. The jury members' expressions changed from neutral curiosity to disgust. Then, the footage showed me revealing my sheriff's badge. Karen's voice could be heard in the background shouting, "That badge doesn't scare me." And the collective gasp that filled the courtroom at that moment said it all. When the video ended, the HOA lawyer looked defeated. There was no defense left. The judge took a long pause before announcing his decision. The HOA board is hereby dissolved under the authority of county governance. Its assets and responsibilities are to be transferred to the local municipality. Additionally, each board member will be held personally liable for damages and harassment against Sheriff Ross. Karen's jaw dropped. Her husband buried his face in his hands. The rest of the HOA members looked like ghosts, realizing the empire they had built on intimidation had just crumbled in seconds. But justice wasn't just about punishment, it was about restoration. After the trial, I walked out of the courthouse into a bright, clear afternoon. A small group of neighbors stood waiting outside, clapping quietly as I passed by. Some came up to apologize. "We didn't know what they were doing, Sheriff," one elderly man said, tears in his eyes. "We were afraid to speak up." I smiled and placed a hand on his shoulder. It's never too late to do the right thing. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood began to change. Without Karen's control, the place actually started to feel like a community again. Kids rode bikes on the street without being yelled at for noise. Neighbors helped each other paint fences, plant gardens, and fix porches. The driveway where the whole mess began was now just a quiet stretch of concrete where my truck sat proudly. No tickets, no warnings, no angry notes, just peace. One afternoon, as I was cleaning my truck, I saw Karen for the first time since the trial. She was loading boxes into her car, her house now up for sale. Our eyes met for a brief moment. She didn't say a word, just looked down and closed her trunk. I gave her a small nod, not out of pity, but closure. Sometimes, silence says more than any argument ever could. She got in her car and drove away, leaving behind the neighborhood she once ruled. I turned back toward my home, feeling a calm satisfaction wash over me. Not the kind of joy that comes from winning, but the peace that comes from setting things right. That night, as I sat on my porch watching the sunset, I thought about everything that had happened. The false calls, the public humiliation, the trial, and finally, the justice that followed. It was a long road, but it proved something important. No matter how much power someone thinks they have, truth always stands taller. A few days later, I hung a small wooden sign on the mailbox. It read, "Welcome to the neighborhood where respect lives." It wasn't about me anymore. It was about rebuilding trust, showing people that authority can protect, not oppress. For the first time in a long time, I felt proud, not just as a sheriff, but as a neighbor. The next morning, I drove through the gates that once symbolized control and fear. Now, They were open wide, welcoming everyone who entered. The sun glinted off my truck as I turned onto the main road, a reminder that standing up for what's right might not be easy, but it's always worth it. Justice had been served, and peace had finally come home. If you enjoyed this powerful story of truth and justice, don't miss the next one on HOA Bright Reality. For more real-life inspired stories, like, share, comment, and subscribe to HOA Bright Reality on YouTube.